Block 27 of the Auschwitz Memorial. It contains 4.2 million names. I happen to have that book here with me. Well, not the book. That'd be too large to carry. Just a photo. This photo indicates the book probably a good 20 feet long. And I'm no expert, but those books are almost to the ceiling, and it's probably a good 8 feet. Quite a few people. It's the single largest physical compilation of names of those that have died at the Nazi hands. The right to a peaceful life is not trumped by the right to hate speech, or hate groups, and any derivatives thereof. It is my belief, as such, that the freedom of speech clause in the Constitution should be amended to exclude hate speech and hate groups. That way, we can legislate action against them. We need to consider it not infringement to suppress such views. In the past week, there was a shooting at a synagogue. 11 people were killed, Jewish people. His goal was specifically to kill the Jews. According to the Pyramid of Hate that was created by the Anti-Defamation League, a Jewish league that created it such that we can identify acts of hate and their rise, all the acts of hate in the pyramid support one another. It starts with bias, individual acts of prejudice, discrimination, bias-motivated violence, and finally, lastly, and most terrifying, genocide. I happen to have a little picture here of the Pyramid of Hate. If one was to open a history book and look out throughout history, they would find that this pyramid can be applied to all acts of hate, but specifically towards racial prejudice. It was worse for the Jewish people because far too often it escalates to genocide. For the Jewish people, the memory of genocide is all too recent. As someone who has studied history for several years, I intend to prove to you all why limiting freedom of speech may not be the craziest answer out there, and perhaps may propose a solution. I'll be going over, in depth, the stages of the Pyramid of Hate, as well as the brief history of Nazism and its rise in Germany, including Hitler's rise to power, as attributed to the pyramid. Throughout history, people have been allowed to write and say very hateful things and hate speech without any consequence. As one stage of the pyramid gets bolder and they grow, they will get bolder and bolder, and then the first stage will support the second stage. As they get into the second stage, their numbers will grow and grow, getting bolder and bolder, repeated to the third, fourth, and final stage. Last week's terror attack at the synagogue indicated that the small groups have moved, at least in part, to stage 4. I am proposing that we start and nip this issue in the bud, placing legal consequences for acts of prejudice and prejudice attitudes. It would be an effective way to prevent the growth of hate. The pyramid itself, more in depth, what each stage means. Prejudiced attitudes include stereotypes, those who do not challenge belittling jokes, as well as scapegoating, which is assigning blame to a group of people, which is largely what has happened to the Jewish people throughout history. Stage 2, acts of prejudice. Name-calling, ridicule, social avoidance, exclusion, and more belittling jokes. Stage 3 is discrimination itself. Employment, housing, educational, and harassment. Violence, arson, and desecration, as well as threats, assault, terrorism, and murder make up stage 4, which is what the shooter belongs to. And finally, genocide. I think we all know what genocide is. The only reason I say this is so that we do not repeat history. We avoid it, and we learn from it. In World War II, Hitler did not start by executing the Jewish people. He started at the bottom of the pyramid, and then he worked his way up the ladder. Nobody stopped him, or was it that nobody could? No one stood up in time. In the words of Martin Niemöller, who perhaps turned from a Nazi sympathizer to an opposer for selfish reasons, his quote does still ring true. First they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to stand up for me. In conclusion, tragedy is all around us. It surrounds us in everyday life. Some of it is avoidable, others not. But in the case of acts of terrorism and acts of racial bias, it is all too preventable. We can learn from the past. The Pyramid of Hate has helped catalog the stages that it follows. From bias to individual acts of prejudice, discrimination, violence, and genocide. With the terrorist shooting at the synagogue, that puts us in the fourth stage. Now is as good a time as any to put legal ramifications on acts of hate. We are one category away from the final. We need to propose the laws and prevent it. Remember, the acts at the bottom of the pyramid support the ones at the top. Take out the ones at the bottom, and the rest will crumble. Thank you.